Hello everyone, it's Scott and welcome to today's spoiler video. We got previews of Magic's latest set, Foundations at MagicCon Las Vegas. And today we're going to look at the new cards from the set that are new to Magic, because we know about half the cards from the set are going to be reprints, and we'll talk about those in a separate video. So before we begin, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Foundations spoiler season. So let's dive in. So first we've got Kaido Cunning Infiltrator for 1 and 2 blue mana. You can legendary planeswalker Kaido with 3 loyalty, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Kaido. His +1 ability, up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card, then discard a card. So very helpful ability there in increasing Kaido's loyalty, because you doing +1, you're really doing +2 because that creature cannot be blocked by your opponent. For -2, you get to create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. And for -9, you get an emblem with whenever a player casts a spell, you create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. So I think Kaido is going to be a very powerful and important card in Standard moving forward. This is going to really have a significant impact on blue decks, where you've got a planeswalker that really helps your strategy out significantly. And just being able to create the 2/1 ninja tokens and give creatures unblockable, I think make this a very playable card in Standard. Next, we've got Chandra, Flame Shaper for 5 and 2 red mana. You get a legendary planeswalker Chandra with 6 loyalty. Her +2 ability adds 3 red mana to your mana pool, and you get to exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you get to choose one of them, and you may play that card this turn. So 7 mana, you get 3 of it back to cast a spell from the top of your library, in essence. So nice ability there. Her +1 ability creates a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token. And for -4, Chandra deals 8 damage to divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. So very powerful planeswalker card here that can really do a lot of different things to help your game plan. The problem, though, with Chandra is she's 7 mana. And that's going to be, I think, the thing that prevents her from seeing a tremendous amount of Standard play, because 7 mana in Standard is a really high barrier to get to. And because of that, I think Chandra's probably not going to see a whole lot of Standard play. Next, we've got Twin Flame Tyrant for 3 and 2 red mana. You get a dragon, that's a 3/5 with flying. And if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. So Twin Flame Tyrant, outstanding card. Definitely red decks are going to want to play this. And really any deck that you're playing red in, I think, is going to want this, because we're already seeing Bloodletter of Aklazad see a lot of play in Standard and also in Pioneer. And Bloodletter's ability only doubles up the damage when you do that damage to an opponent. Well, Twin Flame Tyrant does it if it's damage to a creature on the field of battle. So now all of your things that you're attacking with, even if they're relatively small creatures, they're going to double the damage that they inflict on your opponent's creatures. So I think this is a very, very powerful card in Standard, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see it have application in older formats as well. Next, we've got Herald of Eternal Dawn for 4 and 3 white mana. You get an angel. That's a 6/6 with flying and flash. And you can't lose the game, and your opponent can't win the game. So Herald of Eternal Dawn, we've seen cards like this before that basically make it impossible for your opponent to win the game unless they can remove that particular card from the field. And we in a format that has a lot of black removal. So I think under those circumstances, it's going to be a little harder to play this. But I think the bigger problem with it is it's 7 mana. And 7 mana in Standard is a long way to go to get a card into play. So it's got to have something that really you want in terms of abilities to make it playable. And maybe in control builds, this is a card that might see some top end play in those decks, or you'd have to have it in some kind of deck that's ramping. Next, we've got Bloodthirsty Conqueror for 3 and 2 black mana. You get a Vampire Knight, that's a 5/5 with flying and Death Touch. And whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So I think this is a great top end card for black decks, because this is basically giving all of your combat damage or any damage you do to your opponent lifelink. And that's really powerful. And one of the things that we know right now, given the current standard format, is we've got a lot of aggro decks that are trying to go underneath people and get wins by turn 4 or 5. And if you put this down, you attack, now you're going to get a bunch of life back. And I think that might just be enough to make this card a viable top-end card in Standard. Next, we've got Niv-Mizzet Visionary. So you get a 5/5 legendary creature that's a dragon wizard with flying, and you have no maximum hand size, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. So Niv-Mizzet, great creature here. I think this goes in some kind of Izzet Spellslinger deck, where you're utilizing all of the red burn spells to do damage to your opponent, and then draw lots and lots of cards from that. Now, the only drawback to the card is that it is 6 mana, so I think you'd have to include this in a build where you're going to be able to create treasure earlier in the game to go ahead and get Niv-Mizzet out by turn 4 or 5. And if you can do that, then I think Niv-Mizzet is a very, very powerful card, and one that your opponent, if they can't deal with it on the field, you're going to be able to draw your deck because of his ability. Next, we've got Erebos, the First Fang for 2 and a white mana. You get a legendary creature, that's a cat avatar. It's a 2/2. And other cats you control get +1/+1. And whenever Erebos or another non-token cat you control enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 white creature token. So very powerful abilities on Erebos. So, giving other cats a +1/+1, great ability. But I think the bigger one is every time you cast a cat spell, then you're going to get a cat token as well. And because of that, I think we're likely to see a cat deck based on the cards already previewed from Foundations. And because of that, I think this is really the key card in that deck, because it's going to be able to, increase the power and toughness of all your creatures, but also then it helps you to go wide as well, because you're going to get to create those cat tokens. Next, we've got Crystal Barricade for 1 and a white mana. You get an artifact creature, that's a wall. It's a 0/4 with Defender. And you have hexproof and prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. So this is kind of an anti-red card in essence, but I think control decks are going to like this card a lot and want to play it because it gives you the player hexproof. And because of that, that means duress and other spells that would attack your hand, they can't do that with those while Crystal Barricade is on the field. So control strategies, I think, are going to really want this because it's going to prevent a lot of the interaction that black and red decks are doing currently in Standard. Next, we've got Mossborn Hydra for 2 and a green mana. You get an Elemental Hydra with Trample, and this creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. It also has Landfall, so whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, you get to double the number of +1/+1 counters on this creature. So this, to me, is a easy include in the Nissa landfall deck that we've currently had in Standard for a while, along with Bristly Bill. That combination of cards I think is going to be really powerful in Standard, and the fact that the Mossborn Hydra has Trample, that means you're going to be able to double his power and toughness regularly, and then be able to trample through damage to win the game. Next, we've got Tiny Bones Bauble Burglar for 1 and a black mana. You get a legendary creature, that's a skeleton rogue, and is a 1/3. And whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it. And during your turn, you may play cards you don't own with stash counters on them from exile. And mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. In addition to that, you've got for 3 and a black mana, and you can tap Tiny Bone, and each opponent discards a card, and you activate this only as a sorcery. So currently in Standard, we have a pretty solid discard deck, and I think Tiny Bones just is a nice inclusion in that as a way to really get additional value from forcing your opponent to discard cards, because his ability to then give you the opportunity to play them later in the game, I think is a really solid, powerful ability in Standard. Next, we've got Zul Ashar Lich Lord for 1 and a black mana. You get a legendary creature, that's a zombie warlock, and is a 2/2 with ward, pay 2 life, and you can tap it and you may cast target zombie creature card from your graveyard this turn. And that's really, I think, where Zul Ashar is going to be potentially important in Standard and other formats, is all those zombie cards that are in Standard right now become replayable if your opponent kills them, because you'll be able to replay them with Zul Ashar from your graveyard. And if we do have a dedicated zombie deck, clearly Zul Ashar is a easy include in that. Next, we've got Seer Slicer Goblin for 1 and a red mana. You get a Goblin Warrior, that's a 2/1 with Raid. And at the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. So Seer Slicer Goblin, I think, potentially has a couple of homes. I wonder if this finds its way into the Convoke deck as a way of just getting extra value when you're attacking. You get to create those extra 1/1 goblin creature tokens when you do. And in addition to that, right now we may or may not have enough goblins to really create a dedicated goblin deck, but we'll have to see what else this set gives us for goblins. And possibly then, I think we might even have a goblin deck that is playable in Standard. We do have a Goblin Lord from Dominaria United that really hasn't seen any play because there hasn't been enough goblins to do that. But hopefully Foundations will give us enough that a goblin deck is playable in Standard. Next, we've got Archmage of Runes for 3 and 2 blue mana. You get a Giant Wizard, that's a 3/6. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to draw a card. So very powerful card on its surface. The problem with it, though, is it costs 5 mana. And in Standard, we're moving so quickly right now that I don't think this sees play currently until Standard slows down a little bit. Because right now we know, with all of the aggro strategies that are very good in Standard right now, it's going to be hard to get to a 5 mana blue card in Standard. But if we are at a place where the Standard format slows down a little bit, then I think this is definitely a playable card. And what makes it playable to me is the card draw ability. So every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you get to draw additional cards. That's going to help significantly with your game plan. And because of that, it's got a little bit of Standard playability as long as the format slows down a little bit. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards for the day that I think are cards that people are going to consider playing in Standard. So first is Arcane Epiphany for 3 and 2 blue mana. You get an instant, and this spell costs 1 less to cast if you control a wizard, and you get to draw 3 cards. So this is obviously meant to go in a wizard's deck, and if we do have a dedicated wizard's deck, then Arcane of Epiphany is going to be a card that those decks might want to be playing in Standard. And also, we've got Refute for 1 and 2 blue mana. You get an instant, and you get to counter a target spell, then draw a card, and then discard a card. So this is a better Cancel. So Cancel is a card that goes back to the 90s, and it was a replacement meant for counterspell in Standard, and it never really took off because the reality for 3 mana, it really wasn't strong enough to see a lot of play in Standard, but Refute gives you the additional advantage of card draw and then discard. So I think there's some Standard playability for this in the right deck. I could even see the Oculus deck wanting this as another way of discarding cards, but then also being able to counter your opponent's abilities and spells. Next, we've got Crypt Feaster for 3 and a black mana. You get a zombie. That's a 3/4 with Menace, and it also has Threshold. Whenever this creature attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, this creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now this is a common, but I like the fact that it has Menace, so definitely is going to be a limited playable card. But if you do play this in a dedicated kind of graveyard style deck, then you're going to make it a 5/4, and 5/4 for 4 in black is a pretty good value. And our last card of the day is Mindsparker. For 1 and 2 red mana, you get an elemental. That's a 3/2 with first strike. And whenever an opponent casts a white or blue instant or sorcery spell, this creature deals 2 damage to that player. So what we've seen over the course of the last year of Standard sets is abilities on red cards that chip damage your opponent. And I think because of that, this is probably potentially a sideboard card, especially if we do see more white and blue strategies in Standard. Then I think it really does fit in well as a way to punish them for playing blue and white. But outside of that, I don't think it's very Standard playable. Again, it's probably a sideboard card in those decks, but we do have a bunch of different ways to do this in Standard where we're dealing that kind of chip damage, and this does go well with our Twin Flame Tyrant card, because that would do 4 damage to your opponent when this happens. So I think there's some applications for it in Standard, but we'll just have to see where it fits in. Alright, those are our new cards from Foundations. Tell me what you think in the comment section. Am I missing something? Is there a card that you particularly like? And then also remember, like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Foundations spoiler season. Thanks. I'll see you in the next one.